Good afternoon, Tony Dottino doing my Live with Tony. And as we are approaching the 4th of July weekend, it brings us into July 2022 and our qualifying rounds for our 23rd USA Memory Championship. So I thought I'd just take our broadcast today to share some of the stories of some of our USA champions, memory champions, and some of the great things that they've done and what they're all about. And so the very first one that always comes to mind is our very first year at the Park Central Hotel in New York City, uh, ready to get our competition started. We had Tony Bizan there and Von der North and TV cameras and radio and newspaper reporters in the hallway and ready to get started. And in comes Tatiana Cooley. And she was a secretary at that point in time and said, I just heard about this on the radio and I would love to see if I could compete. Is it still possible for me to enter? And then she came just at the bell. We all huddled about and we turned around and said, why don't we give her some of the competitions and give her a seat and have her compete? And wouldn't you know, Tatiana wins the first 3 years of the USA Championship. And so, what a great story she became. She appeared on Diane Sawyer for several years in a row. Actually, was interviewed in Sports Illustrated, which coined the phrase "mental athletes" for us, and just was a fabulous winner of our first 3 years of our competition. And the only challenge for Tatiana is she never realized and practicing mnemonics as she went about her regular lives with her parents driving in the car. And it was an interesting story that came out during her interview with Sports Illustrated that we had in a cafe in New York City. So off we went, comes our fourth year, and I get Karen Pinson, who's my chief in charge and has done a phenomenal job for 23 years at pulling all this together. And here comes my chief in charge telling me as we approach our fourth event at the Con Edison Auditorium in New York City that we have a cancer survivor who is competing in this year's event. And he had been going through chemotherapy treatments, and his brother had egged him on to study memory because chemo is now showing more and more to have some impact on memories. And so some of our cancer hospitals are actually having people learn memory techniques prior to undergoing chemo or during it. And so in comes a cancer survivor being treated by chemo. And he comes along and unseats Tatiana Cooley. And he turns out to win the competition 4 years in a row. And you may know him as Scott Hagwood, a former engineer from GE living in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and wins it 4 years in a row and winds up writing a book on memory and what his feats were and how he accomplished those and the practicing that he did. And so Scott Hagwood became a popular person for 4 years as he won the event 4 years in a row. A bit of intense at times, moved the records for all of our competitions, especially our deck of cards, and retired as a four-time champion. So we had Tatiana doing 3 years and Scott Hagwood doing 4 years, and there went the first 7 years of the USA Memory Championship. And along the way, and coming throughout those years, then came a mountain climber, a person worried about his grandmother and having Alzheimer's and wanting to learn what could he do about memory loss, and were there any skills and or things that he could learn that might help his brain fitness. And he comes along and doesn't win the first year or so, but 23 years later became our five-time USA Memory Championship, unseating Scott Hagwood as the most popular winner of the USA Memory Championship, and that happens to be Nelson Dellis. And so Nelson now has his own podcast and his own broadcasting and Facebook following, and people that check in with somebody who never thought of himself as having a good memory, but then decided to read some books and study some practices and do some things to give it a go, and certainly not discouraged. And being a mountain climber, not winning the first year or so, certainly did not discourage him from saying, I'm going to stay in with this and I'm going to keep plugging away. And so Nelson wins the competition. And I always remember two things about Nelson. And it's amazing he's won 5 years, because in one year, we're at the U.S. Science Channel is filming us, and they've got the TV cameras on, and boy, we're having the final events on the stage at Con Edison, and Nelson happened to glance sideways and looked at a guest that he had had in the auditorium, seating there in one of the early rows, kind of cheering and rooting him on, and it diverted his attention, and he missed a card in the final event. And with that miss of the card, he was eliminated from the competition, and someone else went on to win the event in that particular year, and it was not Nelson, though I would have expected. If he hadn't made that glance, that might have been another USA Memory Championship for him. And then Nelson comes along wanted to go to that fifth event, wanted to get that fifth championship, comes up to MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts for our 20th event, which hosted our event at that point in time. And we introduced the long-term memory sequence in that, which really advanced our work of memory to a whole new level. And that was under the urging of Jim Carroll, who really encouraged us to test long-term memory. So we gave mental athletes a whole month and 3,500 data bits, from the periodic tables to the Baseball Hall of Fame to the Rock Hall of Fame to the Football Hall of Fame. So we gave them a whole bunch of different data bits, and then we put questions in front of them, and we flashed those questions on the stage so the audience could play. But the short story of that was Nelson missed up again in one of the early events, did not qualify for long term. And there went his bid for the fifth event, which I think he was focused on a book that he was writing at that point in time. But in 2021, when we came back here to host our 22nd event in Orlando, Florida, and Nelson finally came and claimed his fifth USA Memory Championship, and subsequently has retired, and will guide his students and peers and part of our USA Memory team into how do we best hold future competitions from the experiences that he has learned over 20 plus years of our competition and event. Another gentleman that really sticks out in my mind was a writer for Slate magazine, and that particular gentleman came along and did some writing for Slate, posted that out, which actually got us to meet Mark Cuban. But in any case, this was Josh Foer, and Josh turned around and subsequently wrote the book called Moonwalking with Einstein. And we probably have gotten as many people finding out and learning about us from that book, Moonwalking with Einstein, as any introduction we ever had, any broadcast news media. We've been on all ABC, CBS, NBC news shows, but that was the one book that really got put out there that really got more people interested in wanting to enter the competition. And Josh almost lost that. He actually lost out at the won out at the very last end. He was ready to go out next, but the person right before him was the person that went out, and that became Chester Santos, who subsequently won and has become the U.S. Man of Memory. So Chester has traveled the world. He's traveled the castles and countries, and has just been a phenomenal representative of the USA Memory Championship. And then last but not least, one of our military people was practicing using memory techniques on a mission he had in the war zone, and that was Ronnie White, who was some of our favorite personalities that entered the competition, and we always thank him for the service he did. But boy, my God, winning the USA Memory Championship on 2 occasions put him on a different level and a different page. So that's a little bit as we approach our 4th of July holiday, and I think about the upcoming qualifying events on July 30. It just made me think of some of the great people that we have entered into the USA Memory Championship. And with that, I wish you all well, I know it's Wednesday, so I still have Friday. Be back on Friday, and we shall see you then. to finish out the week and wish you a good holiday weekend. So have a good rest of your week. We'll see you Friday.